Symphony Orchestra. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We know that you, like all of us at the CSO, share a real sense of loss, the loss of live orchestral music making in music hall. I think it's important, however, in this unprecedented time, and I think valuable, to look back at the CSO's own history, just as we are doing tonight. In our 125 years, the CSO has weathered many disruptive events: 2 world wars, the flu pandemic of 1918, the Great Depression, the Great Recession, and we will weather this as well because of your dedication and support throughout the decades and today. We will be back making music for you as soon as we are able to do so safely. And I will tell you that we are encouraged that there is now thoughtful, measured, forward motion in Ohio toward that return, and ultimately to that moment where live music is again heard in music hall. For now, we are reaching thousands of music lovers every day through our digital music content available on our CSO website and through our social media platforms. We're particularly excited to be able to connect with you tonight via our digital technology. Not always perfect, but it's been an extraordinary help for us these past few weeks to stay connected with our audiences. This evening's presentation is the final installment of our 3-part Louis on 125 series of talks. This series is one of many activities throughout this year to celebrate our 125th anniversary. And in many of these, we look back at our history as a way to better understand our orchestra and to help chart a path forward. I can't think of anything more important in this time that we find ourselves. Tonight's presentation by Louis is aptly titled Luminaries, the guest artists that have collaborated with the CSO over its long history. Now, I want to share with you that throughout the presentation tonight, feel free to send us your questions. You don't need to wait to ask a question until we're finished. Go ahead and be thinking about things that you'd like Louis to answer or talk about, and I'll help moderate those questions when we get to that point in the presentation. Louis is in his 7th season as the CSO's music director, and I would also say Louis is an extraordinarily avid student and a passionate advocate of the CSO's history. Tonight, Louis will share his perspectives as he highlights some of the extraordinary artists who have performed with the CSO over the decades. Louis, welcome.
And thank you all for joining us this evening. It's so great to connect with you. It is 2 months now that we presented the Beethoven Academy, 2 months, and somehow it feels like 2 years. I miss you. I miss you so much, and we all miss you so much. Somehow we take for granted that we see each other week after week and share the joy of music because it's normal life and normal, beautiful life. So actually in this time of confinement, one of the thing I'm doing, which I didn't do enough in the previous years, is reading. And I read a few days ago this beautiful Seneca phrase saying that it is when the sun is in eclipse that actually we realize how precious, how powerful, how beautiful it is. So I can't wait, and I can't imagine, when we will be together again, seeing each other in this overwhelming fireworks of emotions. So I'm so glad that we have this opportunity to do this live stream tonight. Enjoy the talk. Forgive me my bad English. And I look forward to answering your question after the talk.
This third and last talk and discussion has a different theme, which is all the influences from guest artists, guest conductors, guest composers who had a connection with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. And this is so important in any artistic, any life actually. The more you discover, the more you travel, the more you meet people, the more you expose and oppose opinions, the richer you can be by confronting all these different views. And for instance, one can feel that Mozart, after having traveled in Italy, Germany, France, England, was even more himself. So everything he learned helped him to be more himself. I would say that it's the same with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra, or with any orchestra actually. The more you can experience different styles of conducting, of performing, the more it helps you to forge an identity, your own identity. And with guest conductors, sometimes you have conductors who will say exactly the opposite of a music director. And that's fine, because life and art is big enough to welcome, even to ask for different interpretations. This is so important. And I would say also, this is so American. This was the theme of our last recording, the transatlantic, how influenced American music and how American music influenced French music also. So it's not about France and the US, but very soon you will have guest artists, composers, conductors from Russia, from Belgium, from France, from Italy, from Austria, from Germany. That's why it was so vital to have the great Richard Strauss coming twice actually to Cincinnati, the great Edward Elgar coming to Cincinnati and his pieces, having Camille Saint-Saëns performing his fifth piano concerto, Scriabin coming to Cincinnati and performing his piano concerto, and Rachmaninoff, and etc., etc. Also the confrontation with composers, even if they were not here, but always seeking for new pieces. That's why the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra was the first American orchestra to perform Mahler Symphony No. 3 and Mahler Symphony No. 5. So through this discussion, we'll see how having Stravinsky, having Gershwin, having Copland, having Bernstein, having today John Adams, Bryce Dessner, Caroline Shaw, helped us to go even deeper to forge the wonderful Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra sound, style, and identity. the artistic sound, the artistic identity, the artistic style of an orchestra comes also from the community, the general community, and the big immigration in Cincinnati in the middle of the 19th century was mostly German. And in Germany, Musik is heilige Kunst. Music is sacred art. If there is one art which could define Germany, it is music, without question. Therefore, our beautiful music hall is placed in the middle of the city, at the time. More impressive than City Hall, than any Palace of Justice or cathedral. The of the city is music hall. So these German or Germanic roots are really very well known. But I think first it shouldn't be reduced to the CSO is a German orchestra. Well, first of all, it's an American orchestra. And also, what does German sound mean? So for instance, if you compare two orchestras, which are only few dozen miles apart from each other, the Dresden Staatskapelle and the Leipzig Gewandhaus, these orchestras have a completely different sound and style of playing, and they are both German. So I was fascinated when preparing these discussions about how many Russian composers, guest artists came to Cincinnati. And the first of them, which is so important in Russian musical history, Alexander Siloti. Well, he came in one of the very first concerts of the orchestra, invited by Franz van der Stucken, first music director. Siloti was studying music with Franz Liszt. And when he came to Cincinnati, he performed Franz Liszt pieces, Rhapsody, and also the Wanderer Fantasy, the arrangement that Liszt made of the Schubert piano piece. And in this trip in 1898, his first trip to America, he visited 4 cities. He visited New York, Boston, Chicago, and Cincinnati. Then going back to Russia, to Moscow, where he was teaching, and also St. Petersburg. He organized a series of concerts, inviting Arnold Schoenberg, presenting new pieces from Debussy, from Elgar, but also to this young generation, Scriabin, Rachmaninoff, and Stravinsky. So why am I speaking about Stravinsky, Rachmaninoff, Scriabin with Siloti? Well, because the 4 of them came to Cincinnati and performed with the orchestra. Stravinsky conducted the orchestra several times, conducted his holy trilogy of ballet, the Firebird, Petrushka, and Rite of Spring. And after that, when you look at the history of the orchestra, so many Russian giants came to Cincinnati and are still coming. I mean, today, Temirkanov, Valery Gergiev, I mean, they came in the last 10, 20 years. You had before Maxim Shostakovich, you had the great Mstislav Rostropovich. You had David Oistrakh, Emil Gilels. I mean, I shouldn't make a laundry list of all of that, but this story is absolutely stunning. All these great musicians helped the CSO to cultivate the Cincinnati sound. Of course, the connections are also made by special relations between music directors and composers or guest artists. So there is another very strong connection between the CSO and Hungarian artists. Why? Well, because Fritz REINER was director in the 20s, and he attracted, of course, many amazing composers and guest soloists and guest singers, because he was a major opera conductor as well. And it's thanks to Fritz REINER that Bela Bartok came to Cincinnati in his very first trip to Cincinnati. Bartok traveled to America, was supposed to perform the first performance a few months after his concerto was premiered in Germany, Frankfurt, with Wilhelm Furtwängler. So Wilhelm Mengelberg wanted to give the US premiere with the New York Philharmonic, but this concerto was so hard and they didn't have enough time of preparation, of rehearsals. so they changed the program and they played with Bartók his for piano and orchestra, which is a much earlier piece. But Fritz Reiner was already in America, so Bartók traveled to Cincinnati, and they rehearsed this first piano concerto, then traveled back to New York to give the US premiere in New York in Carnegie Hall, but with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra conducted by Fritz Reiner. And Fritz Reiner gave many US premieres of Bartók pieces with the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra during his time. Bartók in 1927-28 couldn't speak English. So he came with a translator, TIBOR, who was a violinist and a viola player. So he accompanied Bartók first in New York and then went with him in Cincinnati, and then became one of the members of the orchestra in the viola section. He is a very important musical. He stayed in the US actually. Was then played with the NBC Symphony Orchestra under Toscanini in Philadelphia as well. I mean, a major figure who was member of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra. So bringing this prestigious history came through Reiner, like Fritz also invited Ernst von Dohnanyi to Cincinnati to perform his pieces. And the history continued. One of the very few first guest conductor of the orchestra was Ivan Fischer in the 80s and 90s, yeah, so many made violinists, pianists came to Cincinnati. So I think it's probably the strong connection came because the talent, and all taste, the mission also to bring new music from composers he liked from his country, but then also from, I mean, Fritz Reiner is the one actually who invited Stravinsky. He's the one who invited George Gershwin, etc. So many major figures. have another important person like Gunther Schuller. I mean, not Hungarian. He was he played horn in the orchestra before continuing his career as a conductor and composer. We shouldn't oppose national schools, so like French composers or conductors or Italian, etc. Just when we see the list of American composers coming to Cincinnati and conducting their pieces, actually, Leonard Bernstein is very different than Aaron Copland. And today, John Adams is very different to Bryce Dessner. And having all this kaleidoscope of flavor, colors, conception of art, life, music is something absolutely, and that helps to forge and to even enlarge the palette of colors of this orchestra. Certainly, the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra is an American orchestra, and one can feel that immediately by the clarity of attack, the care of ensemble, the brilliance of the sound, the rhythmical life and geometric way, but also the wonderful horizontal shape and phrase, sculpting the melodies, and just having, I don't know, on the waterfront, Leonard Bernstein, when you have the most sensuous lines and also such an active rhythmical life. Or in another Bernstein, probably one of his most performed encore or introduction to a concert, the Ouverture to Candide, also so rhythmical, so bright, so sparkling, and some themes which have this sensual beauty and attraction. And the relations between these composers, series after series, inspired us to commission and inspired them to write, for instance, the Fanfare for the Common Man, one of the most often performed pieces from Copland, was a Cincinnati Symphony commission, and we premiered this piece. Also, the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra premiered the Lincoln Portrait. And Bernstein, after having been invited during World War II, came back often and even was for one season the music director, honorary music director of the May Festival. So the important point is not to add a list of names, is to realize how fruitful, how fertile this relationship was and still is with two composers. One of the specificity of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra is also its eclecticism, presenting opposite and complementary vision of the same art. And when you look at the seasons, having, for instance, Vladimir Horowitz and Arthur Rubinstein next to each other are just different conception of the piano and of the music. Having Jean-Pierre Rampal and James Galway are also two different conception of the sound of the instrument, of the style of the instrument. But why choose when you can have both? And you can have this same diversity on composers, having presenting pieces by Elliott Carter and John Adams. Actually, John Adams coming to Cincinnati on multiple occasions and presenting his pieces. So this is definitely very, very essential, that to go deeper in your identity, you need to have experienced so different schools or flavors or techniques, approach, interpretations. And this, when you look at the history of the orchestra, of course, it's impossible to know exactly, because you can only guess by listening to recordings that artists made, but it gives a wonderful perception of the vibrancy of this orchestra. And with the composers, having in the early days Camille Saint-Saëns next to Scriabin, to have ELGAR, to have Richhaus, then later to have Respighi coming several times, Casella, to have Dohnányi, to have Bartók, to have Gershwin. to have Copland, to have Francis Poulenc, to have Darius Milhaud, to have Penderecki, to have Copland, Bernstein, and now continuing with John Adams, with Matthias Pincher, with Bryce Dessner, to have Caroline Shaw, David Lang, Nico Muhly, etc., etc. So being able to meet, to work with all these different artists, with different repertoire, with different aesthetic views, or even philosophical meaning of what it is to share music together. All these elements, which are complementary and sometimes which can be completely different, helped and still help, because the history of the orchestra is not fit. Of course, it's discontinuation. But the more you see, the more you hear, the more you exchange, the deeper you can be, and you can go in your own identity. This period of confinement is, of course, really difficult and painful, but it gave me the opportunity to look deeper in the history of our orchestra and to this amazing history. So there are a lot of names that, and some which probably immediately resonate, some less. I think it's time now to go for Q&A, and happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Louis. That was extraordinary, and so much history, and the big challenge clearly is to try to find a way to highlight and distill 125 years into 45 minutes. And it also strikes me that, as you say, there's a continuum in any orchestra, and especially one with an age like this. You know, musicians come through the orchestra. They typically are here anywhere from, 20 to 40 and 50 years. They figuratively pass their baton. They've all been influenced by the artists and conductors that you've described. And as music director, the baton is literally passed. So I guess the way I visualize what you're saying is that if it's a super highway with many lanes, there's many on-ramps and off-ramps, but the traffic still flows, the musical traffic still flows. We have a number of questions, and I'm going to ask my folks to see if they can put them up on the screen, and I've got them here. And we've got a few minutes to take questions, Louis. I think before we do that, I want to call out and say hello to one of our own very own luminaries, Louis, who is with us online tonight, and that is Dick Waller, who joined the CSO in 1960, I believe, if I have my dates right, 60 years ago, and was the longtime principal clarinetist of this orchestra, a true luminary. So Dick, hello, and welcome.
Yes, because we spoke, of course, of guests, but the tradition of an orchestra is from the musicians. The musicians produce the sound. The conductor can only ask. And for instance, this season we experienced this wonderful experience of premiering a piece from our former principal bassoonist, Bill Winstead. And actually, 75% of the bassoon section are his students, and the other one, the other member was not one of his students. So, but he played next to Bill Winstead for more than 20 years, I think. So this tradition is so fabulous, actually, because it builds generation after generation, experience after experience, what the CSO is today.
Our first question is actually from one of our most generous funders for the CSO, and it's from ArtsWaves, Alicia Kentner. And she asks a question that is on all of our minds, which is, how will this crisis shape and maybe in some cases reshape orchestras around America, and how will it impact, and how will it, I think, help inform how we lead the community back together using music? And I'll just say, I'll say from the national perspective, you can imagine it's had a profound effect on virtually every orchestra. But there is an emerging theme, Louis, that I think I see, and I certainly think will be here as well, which is, it reminds us of the power of music. When your eclipse analogy, when you lose something, sometimes you don't really know until you lose it how precious it is and how essential it is to people's lives. I think with that, I think every community in America is feeling that. And I think in many ways that will elevate the value that people place on performing arts in this country. And Louis, I know you and I have talked about, what does this mean for the CSO, and what do we learn from it, and how do we go forward here with you and the CSO in this new world?
Yes, but we discussed already, Jonathan, together about when we will reopen, and what we imagined a month ago is gone. I mean, it has changed, and maybe in 1 month we'll have a different answer. The only thing I know is that when we will be again in music hall sharing the first concert, I don't know how, when, of course, no one knows. But I know that it will be one of the most powerful, jubilatory moments of our lives.
Yes.
Being together. And then the music is exactly what it needs to be. It's not about music. It's music expressing something bigger than music.
Yes.
And yeah, music is expression of life. And I can't wait for this moment. I know that we all have to be patient, but we can't help for being impatient.
Yes, and I think we have the CSO as the largest performing arts organization in the community. I think has a opportunity and a responsibility to lead that effort. And I'm at least as excited as you are, Louis, to have that moment. We have a question about young people, and the question is, what is the best way to encourage a young person to fall in love with this music as you clearly have, and your extraordinary way that you articulate your passion for music? What would you say to a young person who is just beginning to dip their toe into the classical music waters?
Well, it's not about classical or non-classical. I think the magic of music is singing or playing an instrument, producing yourself the sound, and being in direct contact with the instrument, shaping a phrase, And it's not a question of level. Feeling this, just how natural it is to make music. You know, so often you hear people, well, so often, thank God, less now, but still sometimes you hear people who say, well, you know, classical music, I'm not sure I would understand it. I'm not sure I can get it. I need more knowledge. But when someone offers you a bunch of flowers, you don't say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know, I have no knowledge on botanic, so I can't accept it. I don't have any, and I can tell you this morning when I was near the lilac trees I didn't need any knowledge to just enjoy it and love it.
Yeah.
And so music is the same.
Louis, one of your earlier discussions in this series focused on the music directors of this orchestra over its past. And I just got word that one of those music directors has joined this live stream from London tonight, Paavo Järvi. So we welcome Paavo to our
Hi,
stream.
Paavo. Wow. What an honor.
That's so good of you to join us.
Well, definitely we spoke about mostly the music director 100 years ago, the beginning. But Paavo, the print of Paavo on the CSO sound, on the CSO style, on the CSO visibility is extraordinary. And actually, my very first recording of the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra was this wonderful recording that Paavo made here in Cincinnati with the Lutosławski and Bartók Concerto for Orchestra. And so thank you, Paavo, for being such an inspiration for all of us, to have left such legacy. And please come back more often.
Yes. Louis, we have a question about a performance that you did this fall. It was a very poignant weekend for everyone. And the guest here tonight asks if perhaps you could speak for a moment about your experience conducting the Rouse Symphony this past fall, and what was the experience like in Music Hall that night with, he had just passed away 30 days before, and his widow was in the hall. Maybe you could share your thoughts and feelings about that.
Well, either you conduct repertoire pieces, and of course, when you conduct a Beethoven symphony, the only connection you have with Beethoven is through his score, through his music. With composers, when you commission a piece, it's of course because you feel attraction to their world, their artistic world. And to celebrate the 125th anniversary of the orchestra, I thought that we should commission to a giant American composer, master of orchestration also, because of course it was an orchestra piece, a piece to celebrate the anniversary. And when I got the score, I was a bit disoriented, sorry for my English, but because it was not about celebration. It was so deep, so violent at some moments, and the end with this abundance, saying goodbye to the world. Even if when I got the score, I didn't know really. I have never met actually Christopher Rouse. I prepared a series of questions, and then I heard that he had passed away. So it's very mysterious because somehow I have the feeling to know him, but only through his music. But it was a very mysterious, beautiful, and deep journey. And I think everybody felt it, that it is, his widow actually said that it is his most personal piece. And before that, every time he composed a piece, he was showing excerpts to her, asking what she thought. And for this, nothing. So, but even if you don't know about the history, this is one of the most powerful pieces from today, and probably one of the most important that I have had the privilege to premiere. So we have plans with this symphony. We'll perform it in New York at Lincoln Center in the Great Performers Series, if this virus allows us to come. It must. And I will conduct it also with other orchestras. Other conductors already have programmed it. I'm so proud that we premiered it, and now this piece has its own life.
And in addition to the performance that you talk about in November, God willing, I would ask people to stay tuned in the coming days and weeks for an announcement about how this orchestra will be continuing the legacy of this work in a way that will leave a permanent, put its place in history. So stay tuned for a major announcement on that as well. We have a question, Louis, and this is a tough one. If you had to pick one or two artists from the past, are there artists that in these quiet times of reflection in your home that you would have loved to have worked with, you know, with the CSO in the 20s or 30s or 40s?
It's impossible to choose one. And actually, why should we choose one? We have a season with 20 different programs with the CSO in addition with the Pops, May Festival, the ballet, the opera. The privilege is to be able to have to come almost every week and listen, discover or rediscover wonderful repertoire with different approaches. And would I have preferred Rubinstein or Horowitz? Maybe I would have preferred spending an evening with Rubinstein. I think it would have been more fun. But you know, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I don't remember, we had Yevgeny Kissin coming, and we had Daniil Trifonov coming last season. Why should I choose? I want both of them. That's the beauty, that's the privilege of first of being music director, but just of being music lover. Not only music. If you would have to choose one type of wine, it would be so terrible, so sad. No, we should have unlimited choice. And
That's
we
a great
offer
analogy.
that.
You know, we have time for a couple of more questions. I wish we could, I could ask all of them that are streaming in my direction. I'll ask two more if you don't mind. One is actually a very interesting question, and we get this a lot. You know, the Gershwin project that you did, Transatlantic, which was nominated for a Grammy. generated a tremendous number of questions from music lovers, and this particular one speaks to the taxi horns. And maybe you could touch a little bit about the important changes and modifications and learning that came with this new edition that you recorded, and specifically the tune Taxi Horns.
How much time do we have left?
For 2 minutes.
Oh, we need 2 hours. So I hope this person who asked the question is in Cincinnati. When music hall will be reopened, I'm glad, I'm happy, I'm eager to spend 2 hours with the score showing. Of course, the taxi horns are the most shocking ones, but just a slight difference between a slur or articulation, between ta ya 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 or tam pa 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 pam pa pam pa 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 pam pa pam. It's a different landscape. And Gershwin wrote tam pa pa pam, the sparkling one. Then an arranger, Campbell Watson, after Gershwin had passed away, wanted to make it sound better. I'm not sure it's better. There is legend, and you worked with this orchestra, Jonathan, the legendary other Ohio orchestra, Cleveland, with George Szell. And George Szell said, "Der Komponist hat immer recht." The composer is always right. So let's trust the composer, not his arrangers.
That sounds like George Szell. Okay, final question, and the question is, and I think I know the answer because it's quite visible. What new hobby have you taken up during quarantine? And I think it might be growing a beard.
No, this is a bet, a deal. I don't know how you say that I made with my son Antoine. We decided that until the end of the confinement, we would let our beard grow. So I hope that at the end of the confinement, I won't look like Santa Claus.
Well, I think we have a new live streaming event, which is the shaving of your beard right before you walk on the podium for the first time. Louis, thank you so much. Paavo, thank you for joining us. Dick Waller, and so many people who have joined us on YouTube, on Facebook Live tonight, through our website. We, as Louis has said many times, we cannot wait to get back. Our musicians are as eager as I've ever seen them to make music. It's an extraordinary pent-up energy that I think will show, and people will hear this hopefully in an extraordinary way. So stay tuned. We will keep all of you posted as we learn more, and we can begin to make a more focused judgment of when we will be back. I want to thank all of our sponsors, both for tonight and as well as this entire season. An extraordinary collection of supporters. And I also want to call and thank the Louise Dieterle Nippert Musical Arts Fund for their extraordinary support, along with ArtsWave, the Ohio Arts Council, the National Endowment for the Arts. Again, thank you so much to all of you for your support, your love of this orchestra, and we will see you soon, and you will hear us soon. Have a good night.